in this crisis.
Now, the other topic we want to look at is the Ukrainian economy. That's something we're not going to look at just today. It's something we want to look at in coming weeks, especially with talks of reforms. But today we want to start by looking at the hryvnia, Ukraine's currency. Now, the hryvnia since January has lost about 60% of its value against the dollar. This is a lot of meaning for just normal Ukrainians who've kept their savings in the local currency and currently face barriers in trying to move it to other foreign currencies that are seen as being more stable. And it's a key marker for the Ukrainian economy as well as the faith that they have there. Ukraine itself is in recession. Its growth is supposed to be 10% in the red this year, by the end of this year. So the question is how all of that will proceed, and a big factor for that as well is the International Monetary Fund. Now, Ukraine's foreign currency reserves are quite low at the moment, and the next big injection of currency that will also come with hopefully a rebound of the hryvnia as just kind of support and faith increases is dependent on that loan from the IMF. But that comes contingent they want reforms. So it will be an interesting question to look at who will be in Ukraine's government, how they will proceed with reforms, and how all of that will be received by the IMF.
And now we have Dmytro Boyarchuk, thanks a lot for coming, who is the Executive General of Case Ukraine, an expert on economics, and we hope you will explain us what all it means, because usually it's very difficult to talk on economy and help the people understand what the sense of it.
And the first question, there's a lot of panic. A lot of people are concerned. There are a lot of fears with all of that. Is there, and you know, some of that, they even had the head of the National Bank who's going to try and get dollars from different banks in kind of a publicity stunt. Is it true, or is the hryvnia and the Ukrainian economy, are they in free fall right now?
Yeah, actually, hryvnia was allowed for free float in February this year. However, they were not created any infrastructure for free float. You know, if you move from one mechanism to another, I mean, there was a effectively fixed exchange rate regime. Now, the National Bank is trying to establish free float. You need to create infrastructure, for instance, insurance for importers. If you, for instance, you are an importer, you need to know that in a month, in 2 months, in 3 months, you will be able to buy foreign currency for some specific price. There is no such instruments. Ukrainian businesses assume that, for instance, we get to some other lows. For instance, there was 9 hryvnia per dollars, then 10, 11, 12. There was an assumption, okay, we are there and it will continue as it was previously. We will be fluctuating somewhere near this specific level, and it will be again something similar to fixed exchange rate. It wasn't. And after a new way of devaluation, I must say that businesses were totally lost. Because, you know, devaluation potential was released, current account deficit was narrowing. It, for instance, in August, it was almost near zero. All macroeconomic fundamentals indicated that we are fine. But there was new push. National Bank of Ukraine was trying to catch, to calm down the market. And I must say that National Bank of Ukraine overregulated the markets. People totally lost confidence in hryvnia. They were totally disoriented. And even now, there is no clear vision what we should expect.
So we have approached the National Bank of Ukraine. We went to the interview with the head of the National Bank of Ukraine, Valeria Gontareva. She was appointed in July, and before she used to work for a number of big private companies. So the first female on such position in Ukraine. And we asked her, so what is the government policy? What were the reason for such a fall of the currency? And when do they expect the IMF trenches? So let's see what she had to say on that.
Our IMF mission just arrived. there a few days ago, and they will stay till 25th of November. And after that, I truly believe that our government will be formed and the coalition will be there in the parliament. And after that, we can expect that IMF mission will support our request and provide the next tranches.
And when we talk about the tranche, about what amount of money we are talking?
Right now in our program we envisage 2 tranches, and total amount maybe it will be even more than 2 tranches. Will be, I hope they will be combined, and of course we hope that we will get all these 2 tranches and even more until the end of this year. But if technically it will be impossible, it could be of course the beginning of next year. But I still believe that our coalition will be formed, our government will be there. That's why we will be in time, and we will get 2 tranches or even more to the end of this year.
What amount we are speaking?
We are speaking about 2.8. If we are talking about 2 tranches, it will be $2.8 billion. But if we consider, we could even consider more.
All right, and just a reminder, the full video can be found on our YouTube site for Hromadske, where you can catch all of the insight into the Ukrainian economy. But the first question we had for you, I mean, when talking about tranches and talking about the IMF and this money coming in, is there anything new there, or is that all what's expected?
Actually, Ukraine is totally dependent on IMF money, on donors' money, because we agreed to pay back gas debts to Russia, which means that our gross international reserves will be below $10 billion already by the end of December. It's another reason to be very nervous about hryvnia prospects. As we discussed, people already are not very confident on national currency prospects, and when they see how gross reserves are falling, it will add more fuel to the fire. But in addition to confidence, on the main reason of losing its value is poor confidence. But you know, it's supported by hryvnia printing for the moment.
But so
we experience a huge deficit for the moment. To a large extent, it's related to quasi-fiscal. I mean, Naftogaz. It already have been printed near 100 billion hryvnia specifically for Naftogaz. We are not talking
for them to buy Russian gas, or for what specifically
actually,
for them?
They do not buy Russian gas for hryvnia. They buy US dollars to buy Russian gas and to pay back debts.
Their debt. So why did they print the hryvnia then for Naftogaz?
It's for accounts. You cannot just give money from gross reserves to Naftogaz. You need to sell them for something, for hryvnia.
Okay.
So it's just a mechanism of getting money from gross international reserves. And for the moment, it's one of the main reasons why we are losing gross international reserves, because hryvnia is printing very actively. For sure, it was specifically for Naftogaz, for paying debts and for paying bills for gas, but also we have a substantial deficit.
Is that IMF a recommendation to Ukraine? The Ukrainian currency institution should step away from regulating the currency. Is this something good for Ukraine?
I think it was inevitable. If we assume that in February the head of National Bank, Mr. Kubiev, decided to keep us on the fixed level, I mean fixed exchange rate, to preserve fixed exchange rate regime, we would lose our gross reserves, I believe, a few months ago, to zero, because it's impossible. After it was made a decision to allow devaluation, large part of imports was just killed. You know, people could not buy for that much imports as it was previously.
To place as a burden.
Yeah, when the exchange rate, when the hryvnia devalued. If it was assuming 8 hryvnia per dollar, people would preserve their purchasing power, and it would be a very huge outflow of foreign currency from our country. So it was the only possible decision to allow hryvnia devalue and to try to arrange this free float.
Now, in currency issues, obviously a lot of attention has been paid to the hryvnia, but people have also been looking to the ruble, which has depreciated quite a bit recently. Are the two issues interrelated? Is there a connection there?
I would not say there is a direct relation between hryvnia devaluation and ruble devaluation. There is a relation because, the assault, the attack on Ukraine from Russia, it followed sanctions on Russia. And that was the main reason why Russia now experiences ruble devaluation. But it was not hryvnia devaluation which triggered problems for Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And the last question from me, we know, of course, we talk this week about currency, but in general, during the last months, you have a lot of headlines about the possible default of Ukraine, bankruptcy, about that the economy is doing really bad. So what is your more or less prognosis? How reasonable is that? What Ukraine can do? There are, it's often written that without the reforms, the country would go bankrupt. So what is your take on that?
Without reforms, we would go bankrupt, but I don't see why where we can default for the moment. We have paid all our debts for this year. For sure, in 2 months we will be in 2015, and we can go bankrupt next year. But large payments will start only in June, in July. So we have some room for maneuvering, but anyway, it doesn't mean that the authorities should relax. We are very much dependent on external support, and the IMF, why we haven't received any funding so far, and why the IMF is waiting for new cabinet and for new budget, because it will be a clear indication whether we want to change or we just will be relaxing, will be waiting for some help.
Dmytro, thanks a lot for joining us, and you can read more on, look at our Medium story, our article on Ukraine's currency in crisis explained. There you'll get more information on that, so I encourage you to read. While a huge part of what happens with the economy, of course, is caused by the conflict in the east of the country, that's often explained by the Ukrainian authorities. A lot of infrastructure is, especially in Donetsk region, is destroyed. But in order how it looks like there, what happens on a daily basis, Hromadske journalists are working in different places. So the Donetsk airport, the Donetsk airport, is one like a nexus of this fight. There are the Ukrainian officers and soldiers who are there for more than a month, and we want you to watch that piece.
Як пояснити хлопцям те, що от нас перемир'я, а тут стріляють просто безперервно?
Важко пояснити. Просто підходиш, спілкувалися сьогодні, терпіть, тримайтесь. На жаль, дійсно, воно так відбувається, що якби не видно того закінчення, тобто якоїсь такої мотивації, щоб вона була. Ми знаємо, що не по нам стріляють, відповідь доводиться так само робити, бо боїнок, що ніяк.
Скільки вони вже без відпочинку?
Тривалий термін, досить тривалий.
Ну, місяць, два.
Більше.
Більше?
And now we have already Micheal Bociurkiw, who is a spokesperson for the special monitoring mission in Ukraine, working for months already here from the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. Hello, Micheal. How long are you here already working?
Oh, well, we've been here since early April. And now they're getting close to 300 monitors, and we're going up to 500 soon, and about half of those are in eastern Ukraine. We have over 40 countries represented among all of our monitors, and most of you know by now the mission is headed by Ambassador Apakan, who is from Turkey, and we have a deputy chief monitor from Switzerland. And yeah, it's been quite the job. As you know, I've worked in many missions for the UN around the world, but nothing like this so far. But we do feel that we're getting quite a bit done. We're reporting every day on the situation, and we're facilitating a lot of dialogue too.
Well, it's a huge task to be given and all of that. I mean, we were just kind of, one of the things we want to ask about is, you know, I think over the past week, the OSCE mission has been accused both by Ukrainians of being biased towards Russia, and then by the Russian Foreign Ministry, and then I think maybe even the Russian ambassador to the UN of being biased towards Ukraine. I mean, why is that? How has that mission gotten to a situation that both sides are insisting on that?
Yeah, well, this was a week where we felt quite deep in the hole, you know, and sometimes you have to make light of what's happening. And someone joked the other day, if both sides are attacking you, well, maybe you're doing the right thing. But, you know, it was a week where it was unprecedented in terms of the criticism, but also on social media, smear tactics, that sort of thing. I've never seen anything like this, quite frankly, and I've been at this job of being a spokesperson for quite some time. But I think what we found out is that we have to do a much better job at filling the information gap. Clearly, ordinary folks out there don't have the full understanding of the work that we do. And also, what we're going to be doing now is ramping up our contacts with civil society, spending more time outside of Kyiv, in the regions, talking directly to people there. Because I think what's happening too, remember we talked about this in Ottawa, was that there is a frustration, clearly a frustration at the lack of a durable, sustainable ceasefire. Some people have said the ceasefire is in name only, on paper only. So we're there in the middle. People see us, they read our reporting. We've also received quite a bit of criticism that our reporting isn't substantial enough. For example, we don't say what direction from where shelling has come from, or we don't say who fired. So that's why we aim.
We have one tweet I just wanted to bring your attention to. If you look behind you, so this is Carl Bildt, and he's saying, you know, obvious that Russian regular units are now going into Ukraine again. How will EU react? Minsk agreement totally disregarded by Kremlin. And just because you pointed out the fact, one of the big issues of the Minsk Protocol, the Minsk peace agreements, and this situation where, you know, some people call it a farce. They're saying it's very critical, and I think some of the critical attitudes towards the OSCE are towards this agreement, where the OSCE is, you know, very strongly attached to that.
So there are two things here. One is the agreement. It isn't holding very well. I can tell you that since it was signed, and remember that was way back in September, we haven't seen or we haven't been informed of one single pullback of heavy artillery. I must tell you, though, that in terms of this week, for the first time, I believe it was on Friday, we actually reported that our monitors saw camouflaged men in Luhansk with Russian Federation flags and other badges on their uniforms. Up until now, we haven't said that, because we're a mission that we only say what we actually see with our own eyes. Verification is very, very difficult. Also, this week was very significant in the sense that on 3 separate occasions, our monitors documented the movement from the east towards Donetsk, unmarked military convoys, about 127 vehicles in all, and quite a few of them pulling not light artillery. This was 120 millimeter howitzer artillery and also multiple launch rocket systems. So think of it this way, eyes and ears of the international community on the ground, we report, and then that information goes to others who it's their job to take action or draw conclusions. But we have to maintain our neutrality in order to stay put.
But there were, Ian may bring, there were some information by the journalists like Simon Ostrovsky, who worked there, and more or less what he stated, that that recent convoys of armed troops in Donbass were deliberately displayed for the OSCE and reporters to see that they don't hide that. What will you tell on that? That you know that it's so obvious.
How we conclude deliberately, I don't know, but all I can tell you is that we reported 3 times that we were seeing how many vehicles, no license plates. The guys inside didn't have signs on them either. So, you know, there's a lot of disinformation out there. There's a lot of trickery going on.
Well, there is this, what was it, the ABSE, that this group that was monitoring, far right-wing European politicians who came, and the day before they had the elections in the separatist-controlled East, they created this new organization.
Yeah, which the OSCE.
Right, so very closely, and then I believe it was RIA Novus even reported that the OSCE was observing there, which they weren't.
No, we weren't. And then the other thing about this JCCC, the Joint Coordination Control Center in Dmytro. So what that is, I call it a formation, if you even want to find a word for it, but it includes general staff from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, general staff from the Russian Ministry of Defense. We're not a part of the JCCC, but we've been so connected to it on social media and reporting, I think sloppy reporting. We're there to observe, to say what they're doing and what they're telling us, but we're not a part of that.
Was there the case then, one of this GCCC mission of you use some kind of the OSCE insignia?
Yeah, and that's intolerable. We've told them so. We've told them not to do it, and we will not tolerate that type of behavior, because that's taking our branding and using it. And you know what? At the end of the day, that poses a security risk for us, because I've now heard stories of also Ukrainian military or volunteers saying that they don't like this JCCC because they ridicule them and this sort of thing. So we have to maintain our neutrality from bodies like that.
The Secretary General of OSCE, Lamberto Zanier, said that the observers in Donetsk and Luhansk were being obstructed. It was pretty strong quote, and there were a lot of really strong words. That is the situation getting worse, because there were a lot of information about the build-up in this.
Well, we have one other tweet that'll make you turning around. I know it's unfair, but we know that the drones that they have, the Austrian drones, I guess, have also been jammed and come under some fire. So there's definitely some difficult circumstances.
Yeah, well, I mean, we regard them as monitors, right? So there are eyes in the sky. So yeah, there are there are many obstructions, but these are the main two. So the one is at checkpoints. We are being stopped, asked for documents. Sometimes they want to search the vehicles. We've made it clear to all sides that in our agreement, in our mandate, this isn't supposed to happen. Secondly, the drones. Of course, big fanfare when they arrived just a few weeks ago. We now have 4 on the ground near Mariupol. And yeah, about 10 days ago, they were shot at by live fire. And also this very, very sophisticated, is actually military-grade electronic jamming happening.
No, what does that mean, military-grade?
Well, it means very sophisticated. It's not something, because these
not something you just have hanging around.
Yeah, it's not something you'll buy from a hardware store. These drones are very sophisticated. They're made by a small niche company in Austria called Schiebel. And it has a very sophisticated Canadian-made camera. So what we've done, we've gone back to the manufacturer and said, hey guys, this is some pretty heavy-duty stuff. And what they're doing is they're fixing extra equipment on it so it won't be subject to the jamming. But then you can't protect these things from live fire. They're small, they're easily recognizable.
We like just somehow the OSCE present there let a lot of people believe that there is a monitoring going on, but we understand it's a huge territory, and we should. Can you explain? There are about 100. You have around 200, more than 250 people in the mission, but just 100 on the ground. How are the places? What are the places you can reach? How can you really monitor the situation in such a large area? Can you reach the Russian border, which is the Ukrainian-Russian border, which is probably the biggest source of the weapon coming, and the whole Minsk agreement is about to. Controlling that border. Are you able? What OSCE is able to do?
So the mandate, we're resourced for up to 500 monitors, and we're trying to get to that number as soon as possible. All new monitors that come into the mission, or I should say most of them, will be deployed to the eastern part of the country. Secondly is that one of the main constraints we have is the lack of armored vehicles. We cannot send unarmed civilians to eastern Ukraine without armored vehicles. So we're in need of about well over 100 more armored vehicles. And just the other day, President Poroshenko, on behalf of the Ukrainian government, handed over 10 armored vehicles for our mission. So that's going to be a big help. That's a big constraint. And also the amount of territory we have to cover. It's about half the size of Switzerland, the conflict zone. And then also those checkpoints, shelling, oftentimes we go to somewhere where we're told there's something happening, shelling starts, we have to retreat. I could go on and on about the constraints.
What are the security or safety protocols for the OSCE? If you have an area that, for example, is shelled, and that's something the OSCE observers want to go and take a look at, how long do they have to wait before they can go, or what are the restrictions on that?
Well, sometimes it's very easy to get to, other times it's impossible to get to, and we did have an incident a few weeks ago where we were checking something out, and then our convoy came out of under shelling, and one vehicle, an armored vehicle with a strong things, totally destroyed. Also remember, we do have some no-go areas. This is primarily in southern Luhansk, where the guys who call themselves Cossacks are in control there. You'll recall a few months ago we had 8 colleagues kidnapped. They kept for a month, and 4 of them incommunicado entirely. So we're being extra careful now. Every day we do new security assessments, and then we decide whether we can go. Or there are some days where the guys stay in their hotels or in their residences because it's too unsafe to go out. Having said all that, we do assume risk, a certain degree of risk. We're prepared, and it's very, very dangerous circumstances in many places.
Why there are such limits? In the end, the OSCE is more or less, besides the Red Cross, which has its own mandate, it's more or less the only organization which works on the ground. On the conflict, the whole world is, to some degree discussing. It's so. What are the issues? We know there were some initiatives to, to enlarge the mission, to bring when it's discussed in Vienna. Can you explain why still you have such a little capacity?
Well, I'm not privy to the politics of the 57 participating states, but I'll let you know is that our mandate has to be unanimously voted upon by all 57 states. So that includes Ukraine, that includes Russia, Canada, US, and the European countries that are members. And at the time, when we first were created, and by the way, Canada played quite a hand in the drawing up of the mandate, it was only for 6 months. That mandate has now been extended. And then there's the issue, and it happens not only in the OSCE, where countries pledge support, financial support, but yet they don't pay up. So Ambassador Apakan, in his last appearance at the Permanent Council, made it clear is that, come on guys, we want to expand the mission, and finances shouldn't be an issue right now whatsoever.
Michael, one of the point which is, we've got a lot of questions online, via Twitter, because the Ukrainians, as you told, there were a lot of, there are a lot of some kind easy criticism coming. But one point is that there are Russians in this mission. We know that it's more or less allowed for a country, if the country sends their monitors, it is not illegal, it's there. But we have these 18 people, what I understand, 18 Russian citizens. And who decides who goes? Because what is the other concern? There are Russian citizens, there shouldn't be more than 10% of the team.
That's correct.
But there are other people from countries like, which believe to have some pro-Russian sentiment, like Serbia or Bulgaria or post-Soviet states, and there is a belief that people can be controlled because they're Russian speakers. There is a full post-Soviet space of, people who can participate in the mission. Who decide how it works?
So,
how you ensure
you're right. I mean, you almost answered your own question, is that participating states are all entitled to nominate, they use the word second, monitors to our mission. There's a ceiling, a cap of 10% per country. And out of almost 300 now, we have 18 citizens of the Russian Federation. They were proposed by the Russian Federation. And also, I should say that, in my case, I was nominated by Canada, and that's because of the experience I had. I speak more or less pretty good Ukrainian, some Russian, so these are all skills that we need. When you come in, when you're absorbed into the mission, you get special training, but you also sign a code of conduct that has very strict rules on what you can and cannot do. And one of those is you cannot share information with a third party. Now, I know people are going to say, well, that's meaningless. It's only a piece of paper. But, we work in teams, together in teams. No one works individually, so there's no freelancing or anything like that going on. So you are monitored quite carefully. These criticisms will continue, and it's the first time I've heard that there are nationals from other countries too that could be, criticized or vulnerable. But this is the nature of this beast, if you will, of this organization, 57 participating states, of which Russia is a member.
But there's some interesting issues there because there are no Ukrainian observers, correct? Because it's a conflict within Ukraine.
You'll find that in other missions, whether it's in Kosovo or elsewhere, that's just the way the OSCE has its staffing rules, is nationals from the country do not work as monitors. However, we have employed well over 100, and there's more to come, Ukrainian nationals, and these are people might say, oh, they're just office staff, but they're not. There are a lot of experts in there too
involved.
That are contributing.
In terms of the Russians, though, if there were an actual open declared state of war, then they wouldn't be able to observe, correct? Or would they be able to?
That's speculation. I don't know.
It's just that the rules are there. If there's a conflict between two countries, can one of those countries have observers, or is that not clear in the?
I don't think that's. I'll have to get back to you.
Okay.
On that,
okay.
Yeah, but. If the conflict ramps up, of course, the first thing we'll be looking for is actually security issues and stuff like that. No, I know it's a soft spot for people to criticize us on, but I know some of them personally. I've worked with them in the field, and. You may recall that when the military observers were being held in Slovyansk, that was a very, very tough time as well. We were tasked to help their release, and there were some of our colleagues that I met are from the Russian Federation, and they were very helpful in situations like that. We treat everyone. When you come into the mission, you're treated as if you're a member of the OSCE, not from a particular country. And as far as I can tell, that's worked fine for us. It's worked well.
As I also know that there were some issues on from the Ukrainian side, that there was some information about the checkpoints of the position of the Ukrainian army more or less disclosed. That was more by the OSCE monitor. There was allegation. Is this issue sorted out? And how do you have, if there are some problems, for instance, there was a case when the people with arms were sat into the OSCE car. That was also
it's the photo on your screen.
That was also the photo which went viral. Yeah, you've seen it probably.
I'm not trying to surprise you here.
Yeah. So thanks for reminding us.
So if these cases happen, what happens next?
Okay. Let me take this one first. That was unacceptable. What happened?
And what happened
that particular
there,
case? So the team leader of that group in Donetsk wanted to get closer to the airport in order to observe what was happening. And in lapse of judgment, if you want to call it that, these chaps were allowed into the vehicle, and we have strict rules. Nobody is allowed into our vehicles who are not OSCE staff members. And they went further, they observed, and then they came back. Of course, I don't probably think he realized he was being filmed or photographed.
By the Russian TV.
Yeah, so immediate action. Well, we didn't find out about it until later, but when we did find out about it, immediate action was taken. That person was removed, and a reminder was sent out to everyone that this is not tolerable. So that is very unfortunate because it continues to circulate on social media. The other thing related to this, it actually came up when I was doing an interview on Odin Plus Odin a couple of weeks ago, is that we've apparently been seen in Donetsk in the Park Inn Hotel fraternalizing with the rebels and drinking coffee, this sort of thing. Everyone's been reminded about certain code of conduct rules, but also people also have to understand that, especially in the case of MH17, and by the way, wreckage was recovered today for the first time, but in order to get to that area that is controlled by the rebels, we actually have to talk to them. And those talks happen frequently, sometimes a few times every day, because we have to negotiate access. We have to know where the fighting is going on. So we simultaneously tell them where we're going, and we tell the Ukrainian side where we're going, so that we don't end up where fighting is going on.
And to this situation, if to summarize, we understand that there are a lot of we'll take away this photo, which we'll stay with you for a while. So, if to make some summary on the situation right now, so what are the biggest concern these days on the ground? We talked about the escalation, but what would be the one to?
Well, what gets, I don't know why it happens, but often what gets hidden in the headlines is the humanitarian impact on people. I may be stepping out of line a little bit, but I've used the phrasing, I think we're headed towards a humanitarian catastrophe or disaster in two ways. One, are the folks left behind in the conflict zone. Includes a lot of elderly people. CNN did a piece on that, by the way, today. And handicapped people, people who have no mobility, people who have no money either. Then you have 400,000 plus registered IDPs all over Ukraine. Probably the real number is closer to 1 million. We visited those folks. A lot of them, for example, in Dnipropetrovsk, the center where they register has no heating, very little electricity. So they're a very, very vulnerable group of people, and the numbers are huge. And we all, I think you had a piece earlier about the Ukrainian economy, how fragile it is right now. But the reason we're amping up our messaging on the IDPs and on the folks left behind in the conflict zone is that the international community is going to have to step up to the plate. I know there are a lot of competing concerns, Syria and elsewhere, but these people are going to have a really, really tough time. We heard like 2 or 3 months ago, we reported on it, that a lot of the organizations that are helping IDPs were running out of money then. So imagine the situation now. So we're very hopeful. The other concern, of course, is an end to the fighting. I mean,
but a question with that, I mean, it seems like the classical ceasefire, if such a thing exists, if that's there, is that, you have two sides that have tensions and you have occasional outbreaks, and then observers are there to identify them and to make everyone aware and make it stop from happening. And it seems the situation, that the OSCE mission has been in, or in Ukraine, there have been, it seems almost like the days without fighting have been more the exception than the days that have had fighting, that's been there. I mean, what does that mean for a monitoring mission, which may have an armored vehicle but doesn't have weapons, has to go and investigate these things? What is the job then when everyone says, oh, it's clear there's no ceasefire? What is the mission? It's
very, very difficult, and I would suspect that there are folks who had applied for the mission before when times were a bit more normal, if we can put it that way, or maybe thinking twice, because again, when you do sign on to the mission these days, chances are you're going to be deployed to the conflict zone. So that's a problem in and of itself as well. The other one is, of course, it goes back to access. The shelling is very intense, very frequent. There are places we go to where there was no shelling before, and all of a sudden it started, and we find ourselves in danger. But look, we're here to stay for as long as we can. We're here at the invitation of the Ukrainian government. Many people don't realize that. But when it gets to the point where the fighting becomes too intense, we hope we never get to that point, we're going to have to take measures to protect our folks, because armored vehicle, it can protect you up to a certain point, but as we found out a few weeks ago, they're vulnerable as well.
Micheal, thanks a lot. There would be more questions to follow within,
Happy to come back anytime.
And the story we want to draw your attention is exactly the story about the internally displaced people. There are around 500,000 people displaced, according to very modest calculations. That's just what we know. And just we have one train station in the eastern city of Kharkiv. More than 25,000 people went through. It's called Red Point. There, the volunteers gather together to give people some basic things they need, and that's what you can see how these usual people, volunteers, work and help their citizens.
Которым низкий поклон и огромная благодарность.
С городом пытаемся найти общий язык и работать. Ну, потому что у них отчетность в освоенных средствах, а у нас в конкретных людях. Вот в чем трудности. Мы работаем с 11. Но говорят, что с 7 уже люди стоят, записываются. При этом особого смысла я в этом не вижу. Потому что там где-то часам 2-3 очередь уже исчерпывается. То есть можно прийти в час и зайти в 2, можно прийти в 7 и зайти там, в 11. У нас было как в советском магазине, знаете, там с вечера завезли колбасу, с утра будут давать и потом не достанется. Да, в 12 она кончится, то есть надо записаться первым. У нас колбаса не кончится. И когда все это начиналось, друзья, приятели, знакомые селили своих ну, как бы, людей, которые там жили, да, проживали на этой территории, на своих дачах, на садовых домиках, где придется, ну, людям, чтобы крыша над головой была. Сейчас стало холодно. Домики не имеют централизованного отопления. Вот, как правило, они рассчитаны на проживание в зимний период. Они продуваемы всеми ветрами, холодные. Где-то людям нужно жить в тепле.
All right, and now we're joined by Volodymyr Yermolenko here for our media moment bit. Good to have you back. What's going on in the world today? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, first of all, the world is discussing G20, of course, and one of the best accounts which I saw was on The Guardian, but and many media are discussing that, but basically, as I find the sentiment, the interpretation is very common to everybody. So everybody is saying that Putin has faced a very dramatic and very harsh pressure from the Western leaders, and that's why he left so early. So I think the trick is that basically probably Putin was expecting, you know, some softening tonality because he's looking for a return to business as usual, but the media are showing that that's not the case.
And so that goes, and the second topic you're raising, the issue is the Henry Kissinger gave the interview and advocates for a new balance of power. Kissinger is famous for his article, which he has written right after Crimea and told, let's give it up, then the Donbass won't happen, which was a failure.
Well, that's an interesting thing. He comes again with very similar arguments, and I think I just wanted to juxtapose two perspectives. One is Henry Kissinger, and the other is Dmytro Snyder, on basically the same issues, because what Kissinger is saying that we need a return to the old system of balance of power. Balance of power means, well, pretty much that there is probably Russian spheres of influence, Russian affairs, and we should give it back to Russia.
But what he's talking about is essentially a Cold War mentality. I mean, he is a Cold War veteran.
Exactly.
I don't think you get much closer
exactly.
than...
And here we are facing a very dramatic, I think, contradiction between the balance of power model and self-determination. Because either you say, well, Russia has this sphere of interest and we don't, you know, pay attention to it, or you are saying that Ukrainians have the right to determine their future, etc., etc. But he says in this interview very interesting things. For example, that the West has underestimated that Ukraine has been a part of Russia, then that Ukraine had a very significant role for Russia, but not a single word about how Ukrainians think themselves. And that's a very dangerous thing, I think.
And then you raise the Timothy Snyder, the American historian, one of the best experts on Ukrainian history. He has written another article in New York, a review of books about the Putin's new nostalgia. So what is special about that?
The special thing is that he discussed saying what we've discussed last week, this Putin's remark that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was okay, there was nothing bad in it. But Timothy Snyder is making a very good point, I think. Because we are comparing often Russia and Soviet Union, saying, well, the narratives are pretty much the same. He's saying that there is a difference between Russian contemporary narrative and the Soviet Union narrative, because for Soviet Union, a Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was a bad thing. Because there was an idea of great patriotic war, that the Soviet Union was fighting Nazis.
I mean, in the Soviet Union, it wasn't presented, it wasn't a part of the narrative.
Exactly,
so it's interesting to have someone come out.
And it's interesting that Putin is now saying, well, it's not that bad. And
it seems to be his response to a lot of things.
But Snyder is saying, and I fully agree with that, that basically this is a change of narrative, because Soviet Union was presenting itself as a kind of a defensive power in this war, in the World War II. You know, we were defending against Nazism, etc. But now Putin finds that, you know, this change to offensive rhetoric. Well, we're not only defending, but we are also attacking. And he's not hiding that. He's no longer hiding that. He's saying, well, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was okay because Russia is now attacking you, attacking the West.
Volodya, the second topic you draw in our attention is about life in secessionist republics. And there were journalists, both Russian and I understand different foreign reporters working there. What are the most interesting things they've mentioned?
Well, there are three pieces which I draw attention to. One of the Russian article on Koltaru, another is on Washington Post, and the third one on Libération. The most interesting, I think, is this one on Koltaru, because the journalist was in this region, and he makes a very detailed report of what is going on there. And the picture is very gloomy and very tragic, very absurdist. So he's describing very tragic things, for example, raping, or absurdist killings, or accidental killings, or an attempt to punish somebody. For example, he describes a situation when some miners were celebrating the Miners' Day, but they celebrated for too long, and the police of DNR was shooting them because they were, not respecting the couvre-feu. So, the article on Washington Post is also describing, the chaotic sentiment, the chaotic situation when certain regions, certain territories are controlled by certain warlords which are not considering themselves as accountable to anybody else.
Using this opportunity, there is our guide, the guide of Hromadske on the Medium, on the Separatist Republic warlords. So if you want to investigate more and learn more, you can follow. But what are the foreign media you also want to focus, on the information war?
Yeah, this is a topic, and I'd like to start with this account of Russia's new initiative of launching this new brand of Sputnik, which is kind of a also one of the important details in this information empire.
But what is Sputnik? It's a rebranding of the Voice of Russia, correct? Or
well, probably, or rebranding of Russia Today, whatever. But I think it's something else already. So it's an idea to create multiple reporters' points in every single capital, really important capital throughout the world.
For Russian state media.
Yeah, and basically to counteract what they are saying is in American propaganda, whatever. But the interesting thing is how they argue, how the arguments they put, how they, saying why is this needed. And Kiselov, well, the Russian propagandist is chief in saying, well, because Russia is sending this signal to the world that diversity is okay, that Japanese are Japanese, that Russians are Russians, that Chinese are Chinese, So this idea, basically Western idea of diversity and multiculturalism, etc., but saying that we are Russians are now sending this diversity idea to you. We are more diverse than you are, than Americans, than the Europeans. And it's a hypocrisy, of course, because when it comes to Ukraine is not Ukrainian for Russia, but Ukraine is Russian for Russia, or Georgia is Russian for Russia, etc. And this diversity message is a fake, because there is no diversity in Russia itself. They're not trying to put it in place compared to America and Europe.
What do you mean by that there's no diversity, that they don't recognize it? They just want everyone to be Russian? Or what?
Well, if you take the Russian society and their attitude to diversity, of course, it's much lower than the respect of diversity in Europe. I mean, the respect of Russia, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, sexual diversity, whatever.
And another report, which there were a lot of attention on different media, called the Menace of Unreality, how the Kremlin weaponizes information, culture, and money.
That's a very interesting thing, a very interesting report by Peter Pomerantsev and Micheal Weiss, and it's a very long one. I advise everybody to read. We just made a very, very little, small summary of it. On the one hand, it summarizes what is going on with the Russian attempt to weaponize, what they are calling weaponizing of information, money, and culture. So using information, money, and culture as a tool in a kind of a hybrid war. But and the diagnosis of it is very accurate. But the most interesting thing in this paper is an answer to the question what to do, what we should do. And here are some very interesting recommendations. For example, they're suggesting to set up something like a Transparency International focused on disinformation, to invite all the key editors of all the key media to sign something like a charter on key principles, on good practice, how to counteract disinformation, and also the idea that think tanks, because the think tanks is very interesting. Many think tanks in Europe across the world are taking Russian money and basically advocating Russian positions. So the think tanks need to disclose their affiliation. And many other very interesting things, how to proceed with it, how to respond to this Russian weaponry is very interesting.
Volodya, thanks a lot. We are looking to see you next week, and we will be joined by Micheal Weiss, the editor-in-chief of this of the Interpreter Mag. He has prepared this report together with the Peter Pomerantsev, a British journalist, and we have a number of questions, and I hope London, London is calling. We are calling London in that way, and
hopefully we get all of
questions.
our technical ducks in a row, and we'll be there together. But yes, we have him from New York today, so he's kind enough to get up a little
he's
earlier.
from New York talking to us. Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Micheal. It's a pleasure to have you here on Hromadske.
Hi there. Thanks for having me, guys.
So we had a general question, just to set that up for you first. What are the trends in Russian media at the moment? Which way is Russian state media moving?
Sorry, guys, I couldn't hear you over your translator talking at the same time. Would you mind repeating the question?
Sure, absolutely. What are the trends in Russian state media at the moment? What's the direction that is moving?
Well, I think, the most obvious example would be this sort of conspiracy theory that was promulgated in the last 72 hours about MH17 being shot down by Ukrainian fighter jets, and, this alleged satellite footage that was produced. I don't think this was a coincidence that this came out at the same time that Vladimir Putin was attending the G20. A lot of international pressure has been brought to bear on Russia. The Kremlin sees itself as increasingly isolated and in this sort of pitched anti-Western mode. So this was just another piece of nonsense thrown out into the ether. Oh, look over here.
But nonsense in terms of the fact, meant to deflect blame and focus on Putin, to say, look, there are more questions, or what sort of nonsense?
I think actually, one of the sort of theses of our paper, our report, is to say that Kremlin propaganda isn't designed necessarily to make people believe, these ludicrous theories and counter-explanations or whatnot. It is designed to distract them. It is designed to misdirect. So, again, what happens? Articles that would normally be filed about, just how much of a pariah Putin has become, the fact that Canada's prime minister sort of, said, "I'll shake your hand, but I want you to get out of Ukraine first." I mean, all of these stories, which tend to aggregate and cast this perception of Russia as a country alone, or a country because of its aggressive posture that has become, pariah unto nations. That gets drowned out the minute something like, new satellite footage showing this terrorist attack, the way it happened is not how you've been led to believe. The problem with it is the production of it was so amateurish, it was so farcical. I mean, Google image search debunked that claim within 30 seconds. That it strikes me as a kind of a mode of desperation, or an act of desperation. I think the Kremlin is sort of casting about and doing everything and anything in its power to change the conversation or change.
But to play devil's advocate a little bit here, which is maybe also a favorite card of some Russian media, though not only them. I mean, this idea of using propaganda, that's not unique to Russia. What is it that Russia does that really makes it different, or the way that it does it, I suppose?
Well, I think, their clever trick, if you like, is they understand that the Western media is duty-bound to report, quote, both sides of the story, right? I mean, there's a transparency and openness to the Western news cycle that there is not to the Russian news cycle, particularly now that independent media voices are being, completely eclipsed or silenced. So what I would say that Putin is very adept at doing is he seconds organizations like the BBC or the New York Times or the Washington Post, makes them unwitting and unwilling accomplices in the dissemination of misinformation. To give you one example that I like, when the chemical weapons attack in Syria was perpetrated in August of 2013, Alexander Lukashevich, the spokesman for the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Russia, said, "Oh, well, we can prove instantly that this whole thing was a hoax, or it was, staged for, by the rebels to try and draw Western intervention." And his evidence was the first YouTube video showing the alleged victims of this chemical attack had been uploaded before the attack itself. Now, what he didn't realize is YouTube runs on California time, not Damascus time. So the real story there is the Russian Foreign Ministry doesn't know that the Earth moves around the sun in daily fashion, except that this actually was picked up by the mainstream media and sort of put out there as, Russian Foreign Ministry says Ghouta attack staged. So the problem I have, or one of the sort of recommendations we put forward in the report is media can be a little more disciplined. It can exercise a little more restraint or better judgment in understanding that, look, you are, to the Kremlin, a dupe, a useful idiot, or a patsy. I mean, you are being used to put stuff out there and to kind of sow skepticism or doubt, or to inject some conspiracy.
So what do you do? I mean, is it a question of the media becoming more active and having more agency as opposed to just being fed things? Or what do they do? Because the point that you make is that these ideas of freedom of the press and being unbiased, that these have been abused and taken advantage of specifically by Russian state media for the purposes of propaganda and the interests of the state. So what needs to be built up to fight that?
Well, I think, ending a little bit of journalistic laziness when it comes to reporting on these issues, that can go a long way. And look, this is not to cast aspersions at some of the excellent reporting that's been done on Ukraine by Western journalists. I mean, I can name several off the top of my head who I think are just absolutely stellar in the field. But the problem is, as you well know, a reporter who reports, in Ukraine from, the Donbass or whatever, it doesn't end with him, right? He files his piece or she files her piece, then it goes through a series of sort of editorial cleansings or rejiggerings. It winds up in the hands of a sub-editor who comes up with the headline and the stand first of the article. Look, just yesterday, and I tweeted this, I said this is a perfect case in point. CBS News had a headline that says, Russia claims new satellite footage shows who downed MH17. This was a full day after that supposed counterclaim or that new narrative of how MH17 was down had been completely debunked and embarrassed, including by the guy who, this sort of MIT graduate who submitted this evidence to the Russian Foreign Ministry. So the whole story had fallen apart, and here you are. I mean, you have to understand, a general audience, whether in the West or anywhere, they see headlines, they see subheads. There is a psychological effect that these things have, right? Not everybody gets through an entire news story. The concept burying the lead. The thing that should actually be the real big story so often winds up in the second to last paragraph of a news clipping. So when, if media sort of begins to understand that, look, we are being enlisted in this kind of campaign, we don't like it because it embarrasses our professionalism, right? It serves the interests of a government when we're not supposed to be serving the interests of any government. A little bit of more discipline, a little more rigor and methodological soundness can go a long way. And again,
But what does that mean? That means, stepping back from when you get the story and then saying, we'll hold off on this a minute, or this is real information? What kind of rigor is needed, or what standards?
Well, I was about to say, the Lukashevich thing, that's something that you don't need a specialism in Russia to understand. That's literally knowing YouTube runs on California time versus Syria time.
Right,
that's
sure.
Prima facie, So looking at this stuff and saying, let's be very candid here. I work in journalism, you work in journalism. We deal with sources all the time. And one of the difficulties of our trade is knowing who to trust, right? Sometimes people spin you, sometimes they lie to you. But if you have a source, and all that person does to you is lie and dissimulate and embarrass you, right? All that person is giving you is stuff designed to serve his or her agenda. Eventually that person ceases to be a source, or if you have to quote or cite them, you do so in a way that makes it clear that this is not a...
And that brings me to another point, though. I mean, what is the issue of money here? Because part of what you're talking about, people not putting the right diligence in and, doing things that are quick, taking quotes that are there through wires as opposed to speaking to them themselves. It's the issue that, you have fewer people working for news agencies, you have fewer bureaus in country, and this comes at the same time when you've seen that the Kremlin is willing to increase funding to state media outlets, so to RT to open up new outlets, to rebrand Sputnik. I mean, that must be a factor there as well.
Oh, it's a huge factor. I mean, RT's budget is, I believe, $300 million, set to increase by 40% in the next year. I mean, this is the thing, right? In the 70s and 80s, during the Cold War, the KGB had this tactic or this form of tradecraft known as active measures. The idea was to plant bits of disinformation in the West with the hope of weakening or dividing or vitiating the West's response to Soviet aggression. What we argue is, look, whereas 20, 30, 40 years ago, active measures were actually quite difficult to perpetrate. And a famous example of this is the CIA invented the AIDS virus, right? That was a KGB concoction. Or better yet, the CIA assassinated John F. Kennedy. also a KGB concoction planted in an Italian newspaper, which actually worked its way back to the Dallas prosecutor's office, and in more recent pop cultural memory was included in Oliver Stone's rather feverish motion picture JFK. These things take time, or they used to take time. They used to take a lot of resources. Today, active measures have been completely mediated. With RT, you don't even have to go out and find somebody who you can trust, who you can cultivate. Because, you know, the internet has kind of opened this landscape of a kind of, you know, sort of, you know, a fever dream of conspiracy theorists and cranks and lunatics, guys sitting in their parents' basement who think the U.S. took down the World Trade Center, who believe the Pope is a reptilian, you know, space alien, and all these kind of crazy things. You pay them $50, they write an article in 15 minutes, probably less given the quality of this stuff, and they click publish. And once they click publish, people start to read it. And by the way, people who read it don't necessarily buy it. I would hope they don't in the case of, say, the Pope is a reptilian space alien. But, you know, it's clickbait, right? I mean, in new media terms, this is clickbait.
When it's the speed and it's the way of approaching it that's changed, exactly. And it's that whole relativity of truth and what you consume.
An exact analog to the sort of CIA invented AIDS active measure, and that is the CIA invented the Ebola virus as a form of biological weaponry. This was published on RT's Spanish language news service, right? And if we're being a little cynical here, we would say the idea is to have audiences in Latin America, particularly the Chavista countries, pick this up because they're already inclined to anti-Western conspiracies, or they believe the CIA is sort of the most nefarious agency on the planet, and they'll take this at face value. All they'll say.
Well, they use it for their own purposes. Yeah, no, and I mean, I think this is the point that you've made so well in the report. Partially that the media landscape is shifting, and people don't quite know how to adjust to it. They don't have the media antibodies to process it all and to kind of separate the good from the bad, or at least from what's based on actual reporting from what's not. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. But thank you so much for joining us, and we'll continue to be very interested to see what else the interpreter comes up with. All right, thank you.
Cheers.
That's all also can be read when you follow the links in our Medium and all other stories. But in this section, we'd like to highlight stories which we think not getting enough of attention. And this is the story of the two Ukrainian citizens who had been detained in Moscow on the charge of terrorism. They are both facing 20 years or sentence for 20 years in charge of terrorism. Oleg Sentsov is a famous Ukrainian Crimean filmmaker, and Alexander Kolchenko is a vocal left-wing activist accused of the connection to the far right. The issue with the charges are that they are absurd to the extent that the guys would be accused of attempt to blow up the train station in Yalta. Therefore, there is no train station in Yalta, and all the other cases. What is new in this story is that within the last week there were attempt, and in the Russian court, it was told that Oleg Sentsov and Alexander Kolchenko, their Ukrainian citizenship will be taken away, and they would be considered Russian citizens. Therefore, there won't be access for Ukrainian consulate, and they won't have any facilitation as it can happen with the foreign citizens. We would like to shortly to listen to the testimony of Oleg in the prison. He told he's not a slave to be taken together with the land, but that you can hear yourself.
Украина остаюсь. Я не признаю аннексии Крыма и военного захвата Крыма Российской Федерации. И любые договора, которые заключает ныне нелегитимное правительство Крыма с Российской Федерацией, считаю недействительными. Я не крепостной, мне нельзя передать вместе с землей гражданство. Никаких заявлений я не писал по поводу вступления в российское гражданство и отказа от украинского. Я не питаю никаких иллюзий по поводу российской системы правосудия, поэтому к приговору 20+ я готов.
Oleg Sentsov, who you've seen, a filmmaker, he is single parent of 2 kids who are sick, and but his case is more known because he made few movies with co-production with different European companies. Therefore, there were a lot of campaign by the cinema community also in Ukraine, which is very different for another guy. We can also see him on this screen. Alexander Kolchenko will have his 25th birthday in 10 days, but he is less known, a famous anti-fascist activist who for few times has problems with the far right during his life in Crimea. Now had been charged exactly with something opposite. Their trial cost, since they are in Moscow, it cost a lot for their families to reach them, to pay for the lawyers. But what is most extraordinary with this case, this is a case when the 2 Ukrainian citizens were taken away from Crimea. It would be very different if they would have stayed there, because there would be probably a different procedure. For a lot of people, it's kind of a reminding that the citizens of one state could be taken to the other state, and it's more or less like the hope is gone, which also bring us to the times of more or less a Cold War, where there were cases of this extraordinary rendition. So that was the case we'd like to drag your attention, because these guys are really their charge is up to 20 years in prison, and no one really can do anything about that so far.
That's all we have time for tonight. We want to remind you to join us next week when we'll have a special anniversary issue. It's the first anniversary of the start of the Maidan. Please join us then. Take care.